quality of life outside the city is what has tempted many of the residents of suburbs such as Thornton and Timberlane Estate. But the residents say that quality of life could be threatened if Australian National Industries gets the go-ahead for plans for a waste disposal and recycling facility at the former Thornton Brickworks nearby.
To have the city then send its industrial waste up here is totally unacceptable. Residents are very concerned about the very strong potential for contaminating the air and water in which we live.
The depot is intended to take 55,000 tonnes of materials such as furnace dust and sand each year from the Comsteel plant at Waratah. But Mr Grujon says this statement of environmental effects of the depot has some figures that worry the residents. Tests indicate the waste will include high levels of cadmium and lead and zinc at almost 208 times the amount accepted by the Environment Protection Authority. But the report concludes that the depot can be worked with minimal impact on the environment. Mr Grujon says farmers are fearful that if there is any contaminated runoff from the depot, it could find its way into 4 Mile Creek here and end up on some of the richest agricultural land in the Hunter Valley.
Would sterilise good agricultural land. Grazing there can be affected. Cattle drink the waters that go down that creek and irrigation is carried out from it.
Alderman Bob G asserts Maitland City Council's policy on landfill disposal should be tightened up.
55,000 tonnes of industrial waste is a lot of waste to be dumped in our backyard, and I certainly don't want to see Maitland, which is of prime heritage significance and a semi-rural residential area, becoming the dumping ground for somebody else's industrial cocktail.
A spokesman for ANI says the residents' fears are unfounded, claiming the depot will mean managing a resource in a properly scientific manner. Scott Bevan, NBN News.
National Heart Foundation statistics confirm that more than half Australia's male population could be described as abdominally obese. But in the Hunter, the figures blow out to 70% of men being big-boned in the belly.
I just always look at blokes with big bellies, and then all of a sudden I'm looking down at my belly and you can't see your toes. I was going to say something else, but, you know, you like to be able to see it once in a blue moon.
Pot bellies are considered an important risk factor for heart disease and diabetes. Blue-collar workers are among the highest risk categories. Newcastle's BHP plant fielded its heavyweights today as models to test the Gut Buster kit. It features a measuring tape printed with recommendations for safe waist to hip ratios, a weight loss guidebook with suggestions for diet and exercise, and a beer drinker's trade-off chart. For example, 1 middy of beer a day should be accompanied by a 10-minute walk. The kits are being trialled at the plant and measuring tapes are available from NIB Health Fund offices. It takes guts and determination to set an example toward a healthier lifestyle.
I want to be like Dad, so I've got to really put a concerted effort into losing the weight to turn out a totally new family man, like for the wife, for the kids, so I can play soccer with him in the backyard and things like that and really do things, strenuous things.
Yeah, I think it's just a bit of willpower on my part and I might be able to get by and I'm going to be damn sure to give it a go.
No, this isn't a SWAS team out on a dawn raid. It's just the local Belmont police crew going about its daily routine in the new General Duties truck. It's already been on trial for a few months, but it's still turning heads and attracting plenty of comment.
A few people think it looks like an ice cream van, a meat truck, a paper truck, but it's just a matter of people getting used to it.
But others find its uncanny resemblance to an armoured car downright intimidating.
I think it looks like a military carrier, I really do.
It looks a bit more scary than the normal police car, a bit more efficient.
The diesel truck is just one alternative proposed for the F100 paddy wagon, which is no longer being imported. It's got all the latest accessories, lights, bull bars, lights, handy lockers and lights, but the real feature is the air-conditioned passenger comfort. The rear lock-up contains handy separation for male and female passengers and can seat about 10 at a pinch.
Some of them think it's funny, and some of them, I suppose, think it looks bigger and better, and maybe it makes them go easier. I don't know.
Everyday 68-year-old Robert Stoney from Killarney Vale on the Central Coast checks his mailbox for news about when he can have the 3 operations he desperately needs. Just doing this simple task is an ordeal for Robert. He's been waiting for a hip replacement for 7 months and an operation on the veins in his legs for almost a year.
It aches and pains all the time, and I'm always on painkillers.
Robert has also been on the waiting list for 2 months for a prostate operation. He doesn't know when he'll be able to have the surgery. The Central Coast is one of the fastest growing areas in the state, and hospital services are in demand. Nowhere else in New South Wales do people wait longer for hospital beds. Local member Grant McBride says the situation is unacceptable.
What I'd like to see is the Central Coast Area Health Board, that's the community representatives, make a definite commitment to doing something about waiting lists and report regularly to the public so we know what's going on. Set some goals and let us know what's happening. Let us know if there's been some progress.
Boss of the Central Coast Health Service, Neville Boyce, says the recent opening of a 120-bed wing at Gosford Hospital should reduce the waiting list. The situation will also be eased when 2 more operating theatres and an extra 100 beds are opened at Wyong Hospital in July. Jane Anderson, NBN News.
If it opens and closes, it's here. Pink, white, green. You name it, they'll make it. A dozen kitchen manufacturers, designs and workmanship are on show here, and the crowds are lining up for a look, and it seems there's a price to suit everyone.
Well, we have 3 price categories, and that's the most important. Up to 8,000, we have 8 to 12,000, and then 12 to 20,000, which is the top of the range. Maybe not everyone can afford them, but they're there to show you what can be done.
All 12 manufacturers are competing to be judged best kitchen in each price category, or take out the Public Choice Award. You can judge for yourself for the next 4 days.
It starts today, Wednesday, and it's on till Sunday. It's open weekdays. It starts at 11, but we've been so busy we probably will open a little bit earlier. It'll go through till 7 o'clock at night, and on the weekend it'll be open from 10 a.m. till 6 p.m.
Limestone is one of the raw materials in the BHP's iron and steel making process. It's used to cleanse the molten metal of impurities, and while New South Wales virtually sits on a wealth of limestone, 450,000 tonnes of the rock, worth millions of dollars, is imported from Japan each year.
I guess we feel a little bit miffed that it's perverse that the cost of freight from Japan to Newcastle is considerably less than the cost of freight from Tamworth to Newcastle.
Arkland Lime and Cement is attempting to get a $200 million mining operation off the ground at Atunga near Tamworth. Contracts to provide the BHP's needs would be the springboard to the development, but in a competitive world market, the BHP can't afford to do favours.
I can understand people wanting us to use Australian limestone, but the fact is that the Japanese limestone is cheaper to get here, and also it has the better qualities for what we want in making iron and steel. It allows us to make cheaper iron and steel.
The local product has been trialled by the BHP, but it's considered unviable. The Japanese limestone incurs minimal freight costs because it's loaded onto ships that would otherwise make an empty run to Australia for coal. Local councils in Newcastle and Tamworth see job creation opportunities going begging for the want of cooperation on freight charges between state, federal and local governments.
The first thing we've got to decide is, as a nation, do we want these sorts of industries? If we don't want them, well, that's fine. Just let them go away. But if we do want them, well, we've got to all cooperate together to see that it happens.
Understand well and truly how the different regulations force you now to be a lot more professional and efficient than what it was in the... And one of the things that upset people was the...
It was just after World War II when the cranes took root on the banks of the Hunter River, but they came into their heyday in the 1960s. The 6 then second-hand structures shifted a record 675,000 tonnes of export cargo one year. Progress finally caught up with the cranes, ships got bigger and came equipped with their own loading and offloading equipment. After almost 50 years in service, the luffing cranes were decommissioned last year and now the wrecking crews have moved in. For some, the demolition of the cranes could be likened to a few less trees in an industrial forest, but to the Heritage Commission, they represent an important link with the past. One of the old loaders is to remain intact and in place, protected by a heritage order. Andrew Lobb reporting for NBN News.
Bit of a surprise package, the Hunter lads, going into this morning's semi-final against the South Coast undefeated, 1 win away from the grand final. They may be only bite-sized, but they know their way to the basket. NBL coach Tom Wiseman was on hand, on the lookout for some fledgling Falcons perhaps. It may not be big league, but the coaches were baying. The Globetrotters in gold got the better of the South Coast, 45-38, but their unbeaten run came to a shuddering halt at the hands of Riverina. This afternoon's grand final, a one-sided affair, 73-38 the final score. Reward for those two local lads though, Jacob Bruce and Daniel Giles, picked in the state squad.
For the neighbouring residents of the Sugar Valley Coach Depot at Edgeworth, the sound and smell of buses manoeuvring around them has become part of life. While it's bad enough during daylight hours, it becomes intolerable in the evenings and early hours of the morning. Now, Lake Macquarie Council has agreed that the situation deserves a review. Council has indicated that it will use the provisions of the Local Government Act to restrict the company's operations to hours of 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. weekdays and 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. weekends and public holidays. The news has been greeted by sighs of relief from the long-suffering residents.
Well, you get a lot of diesel fumes, smoke sort of drifting across the yard, and a lot of noise. Early in the morning you can't listen to the wireless like while you're having breakfast.
The residents say the restrictions are a start. They also point out that local roads and traffic conditions are clearly unsuitable for heavy and frequent transport use.
It'll take time. Like, it's taken a long time for them to get to this stage. It'll take a long time for them to do something about it.
Bus company owners Spencer Ross Family Holdings have 28 days to show cause why the restrictions shouldn't be imposed. When we contacted the company for its reaction, Mr. Ross declined to comment. Tom Hilston, NBN News.
The new charges announced today by Managing Director Paul Broad are the first since the board was corporatised in January. For residential customers, the increase is minimal, in line with the CPI figure of 1.2%.
The average residential is looking at about $6 a year, which is about 11 cents a week.
But the real benefits will be felt by industrial and commercial users. They'll receive a reduction of up to 14%. Of the corporation's 9,000 customers, 75% will be better off.
Over the years, the commercials through high valuation charges have been paying a substantial part of our charges. Our cost savings over the last 12 months have been such that we've been able to drive those charges down even more. So the average commercial property out there will get a big reduction this year.
As well as improved operating costs, Mr Broad says Hunter Water has been able to sell technology to other utilities, making an estimated $3 million. The new charges will be effective from the beginning of November. Jodie McKay, NBN News.
Well, the sun has just set over Canberra and 150 Hunter coal miners have come here to the nation's capital in a bid to save their beleaguered job from being cast into permanent darkness. The Hunter coal industry is in trouble. 3 mines have recently closed or are about to, and according to the United Mine Workers Federation, there are more expected to shut down. To fight what it sees as a threat to the jobs of its 6,000 members, the Miners' Union has opted not for strike action, but a public campaign called Survival 92. Part of that campaign involves lobbying the federal government, and that's what an army of northern miners did this evening by marching on the political centre of Australia. Northern President Mick Watson told the blue and white clad miners that what they're fighting for here is their very future.
We're being responsive. We're being responsive and we're asking for help. We're asking for government help because we bloody will need it. That's our position right across the board and that's what we want. What do we want? We need it!
Tomorrow morning, a union delegation is meeting with Primary Industries Minister Simon Crean to push for more federal assistance in keeping mines operating. And the union is also hoping that they'll have talks with Prime Minister Paul Keating. In Canberra, Scott Bevan, NBN News.
On June 8, 1942, these 6-inch guns at Fort Scratchley went into action, firing salvos out to sea in reply to shells being fired from somewhere in the darkness into the general area of the city. Both parties apparently missed their targets. Apart from some superficial damage to the city, the score remained 0-0. The unseen aggressor, presumably a Japanese submarine, sailed on. Newcastle was safe. It's probably only coincidence that Japan's wartime performance was downhill from that point. Nevertheless, Newcastle had done its bit, and that effort will be recalled when the guns roar again on the June long weekend. Well, one of the guns at least is being ready to fire a memorial salvo on Saturday, Sunday and Monday for the first time in 30 years. Monday will also be an occasion for a formal ceremony at 2 p.m, recalling the day Newcastle took up arms against the aggressor. Tom Hilston, NBN News. The teachers are strident in their opposition to the Education Department's proposal to use committees of principals, department officials and community members to appoint teachers to vacancies. But not all those assembled agreed that strike action was the appropriate response.
When we have a strike, the kids love us. They get a day's holiday. The parents hate us.
The vote was overwhelmingly carried, setting a pattern which would be repeated across the state. The Federation says industrial action will achieve what negotiation has so far failed to settle.
The government will be watching to see it like a litmus test, if you like, to see how strong teachers care about it. If they show they care, I think they'll have to listen.
At Redhead, fire began in the kitchen of this Burn Street house shortly before lunchtime. 3 units were called and within 30 minutes the fire was under control. The kitchen was gutted, the rest of the house suffered smoke and heat damage. No one was home at the time of the fire. Officers believe it was caused by a stove left on. In inner city Newcastle, Mrs Marceline Tynan was awoken by unusual sounds outside her house at around 4:30 this morning. Half an hour later, her son raised the fire alarm.
We came down and thought it must have been something electrical. Checked everything, couldn't see any fault at all. The lights had gone out, and we went into the lounge and noticed that the carpet was very hot.
It was then they realised the blaze was under the house. Fire officers were called and quickly extinguished the blaze. Police are treating it as suspicious. And today, a timely reminder from the fire brigade of the need for precaution when using electric blankets for the first time this season.
Put it on the bed and turn it on and visually check to make sure that there's no burn marks on top of the electric blanket. That's where it virtually starts. The other problem also is that people will tend to throw clothes on top of the blanket that's left on, and a hot spot is created.
Catherine Lamond, NBN News.
The Numbat represents 5 years' research by the CSIRO and the expenditure of $1.5 million from the federal government's coal export levy, as well as the CSIRO's own resources. The project is still in its infancy, but funding has dried up. Now the researchers are taking the Numbat on tour, hoping that its high-tech approach to mines rescue may attract more funding.
The idea is that it could go down ahead of time, find out whether you're in fact in explosive or poisonous atmosphere, and if you are, then you may elect not to send people down there.
The ideal testing ground was the Newcastle Mines Rescue Station, where Numbat faced a realistic test of its skills. The machine is guided from a surface command centre connected by 4 kilometres of fibre optic cable. From the control panel, the operator can use 2 cameras, onboard computer-controlled atmosphere testing devices and a sonar radar. The developers say Numbat is the ideal advance guard on a rescue mission and could well have played an important role at several Australian and international mining disasters. However, there were some snags today. The Numbat seemed to have been defeated all too quickly by a water obstacle. The reaction to Numbat at the Mines Rescue Station was cautiously optimistic.
Well, it's very, very early days. Technically, it appears extremely sophisticated, and we see some promise in it, but there's no way you could really determine how it'll work until you try it in a real mine.
But the researchers insist that Numbat is the way of the future, and when it comes to a choice between saving lives and saving dollars, Numbat should be way ahead. Tom Hilston, NBN News.
The ship left Eden on the far south coast at lunchtime yesterday on her cruise up the coast. This morning she arrived in Port Macquarie. The original Lady Nelson had a special connection with Port Macquarie. She was wrecked there in 1816.
They got her off and they brought her somewhere up the river and rebuilt her, took the masts out of her, rebuilt her, repaired the damage, put the sticks back into her again, and she sailed away. So I think there is. I didn't hit the beach this morning and I thought, well, I don't want to do another Lady Nelson.
The near-perfect replica of the old ship was built with the help of the people of Tasmania, who are using the ship as a sail training vessel for underprivileged children.
People in Hobart, certain persons felt the need for a sail training vessel to provide the youth of today with things that are sadly lacking in the outside world, like discipline, teamwork, cooperation. We're not teaching them to be seamen, we're teaching them things that are very appropriate to their modern day living.
The original Lady Nelson was also dear to the people of Tasmania, as it was the first ship to cross Bass Strait west to east and transport settlers to Hobart. The replica will remain in Port Macquarie for around 10 days for sail training and to give the public the chance to view a piece of maritime history.
Teams from Western Australia and Queensland began unpacking their gear today in preparation for competition, which begins early in the morning. Defending world and Australian champion Rhys Duncan Jr. of Grafton will be participating, but on his present form and preparation, this year's title is far from being in the bag for him.
Rhys has had a little bit of a bad luck leading up to it, so there's a good chance he might get knocked off. There's a couple of fellas that are trying really hard.
Divisions in the competition include Open, Women's, Seniors and Masters. Organisers are hoping for a return of recent surf conditions for the week-long event.
Synod has been meeting in Morpeth this week. The main issue confronting the church, whether to allow women to be ordained as priests. There was considerable debate on the issue, but when it came to the final vote, the Newcastle Diocese gave it approval.
Overwhelmingly, that this synod believes that women are called by God to be ordained as priests.
Newcastle is the 6th largest diocese in Australia, making today's decision extremely significant. The issue now goes before General Synod, which meets in July. Bishop Holland has given an undertaking he won't ordain the women as priests before then, but he's hopeful come August these women will have achieved what they've wanted for so long.
Oh, it's very encouraging, but I haven't had the bishop's hands on my head yet, and I'm not a priest, so it's always tempered with the knowledge that there are more legal bodies for this issue to go through.
For many years, a Hunter-based sporting hall of fame has been talked about. Today it became a reality, receiving its first inductees. The 21 legends are already members of the National and New South Wales Sporting Hall of Fames and fittingly are the Hunters first to be recognised, along with 14 separate sports. 6 living inductees received their medals personally. Ray Bartz for soccer along with Reg Date, Snooker's Eddie Charlton, Bruce Coburn for water skiing, Olympic equestrian champion Laurie Morgan and cricket legend Doug Walters. The full list is the who's who of Hunter sport. Ray Bartz, Eddie Charlton, Brian Carlson, Clive Churchill, Bruce Coburn, Les Darcy, Reg Date, Alan Davidson, Dave Downey, Kevin Gosper, Ben Lexon, Charles McNeil, Laurie Morgan, Herb Narvo, Bob Newbigin, James Pike, Wally Prigg, Mark Richards, Dave Sands, Doug Walters and Ken Warby. Sporting organisations from throughout the region, numbered around 500, have been contacted by the Hall of Fame committee to supply names for further inductions. And the next ceremony will hopefully take place in 12 months' time, when once again the people of the Hunter will honour their sporting heroes.
Life in Manila was beating to a sports drum today, with most playing fields inundated by netball, tennis, rugby league and golf players. Junior sports people from throughout the region, including Werris Creek and Boggabri, were out to prove their hometown to be the best. At Manila High School, 98 netball teams played more than 360 games throughout the day. And from all reports, competition was fierce. Chafee Park was the venue for the rugby league, and it seemed the smaller the competitors, the mightier they played. Coaches were allowed on the field to organise play, but some little rugby league revellers showed they certainly didn't need any direction. Catherine Lamond, NBN News.
The match between Tamworth and Walker was evenly poised at half-time, only 3 points separating them. Early in the second half, Tamworth got a fortuitous break. Walker made a half break and in trying to link up threw an intercept pass, gratefully accepted by winger Scott Bowen. Looming up in support was John Buck Wiseman and the big fellow was in. But Walker hit back using their backline well, and Bernard Wale chipped into the in goal, got the bounce of the day and scored. For Armidale golfers, the long wait is over. Today, the back nine of the Armidale Golf Course was reopened to members and friends, with 220 hitting off in a 4-ball best ball par event.
Way back in early March, we had to tear the back 9 greens up. We had the fumigators in to fumigate the cultivated ground. We had the greens reshaped and returfed.
It is hoped that with continued improvements to the front 9 that Armidale will soon have a course ready for a major event on the Australian calendar. Coppermite notched another win from Come to Dublin and Lakefield. At Gunnedah, the 5th was the Gunnedah Class 2 Cup over 1,600 metres. Fallout was the winner from Silver Showman and Vinegar Boy.
Government plans to allow Fletcher Jennings to build the hospital and contract May Nicholas to operate it as a public facility have been under fire for months. Investigations into the draft contract follow protests by residents and visits to the area by independent members of Parliament. The 120-page report by the Parliamentary Accounts Committee has found the project would save the government $41 million over 20 years. But it makes nearly 30 recommendations to improve the contract, and the committee is split on whether it should be signed. The report was ordered in May to examine the contract between the government and Fletcher Jennings after 4 independent MPs threatened to block the legislation.